Welcome to this first values deep dive conversation in a series of 12 events run by Global Values Alliance in support of World Values Day, where we take a deep dive into a number of different values topics. And the first one for January is the topic of education. And I'm delighted to be joined by a group of people who represent current teachers, ex-head teachers, and educationalists. So I'm sure we're going to have a very interesting conversation and develop some good thinking. At the beginning, I'd just like to explain the process and the format, and then we'll introduce ourselves with a one word describing how we feel before we start the process itself. So what we're going to do initially is that check-in. Then we're going to have a BOEM dialogue session, which I'll explain the details of when we get there. Then we're going to have a further discussion about the power of education, when it has its biggest impact and what stops it having a bigger impact, before finishing with some personal reflection and a commitment to action in conjunction with the International Day of Education on the 24th and 25th of this month. So that's the process. I'm really looking forward to it because for me, education is so important. I was brought up on a council estate. I was the only boy in my street that passed the 11 plus, and education was my way out of that world into a new and different world. So I'm very thankful because I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for that opportunity. So let's hear from you, please, in terms of name and one word. I'll go first, and then if we could have Sally Ann, Sue, Steve, and Charles. So I'm Alan, and my one word today is curious.
I'm Sally Ann, and mine was going to be curious, but I'm going to go with intrigued.
Thanks, Sally Ann.
I'm Sue, and my one word is hopeful.
Thank you, Sue. And Steve?
Steve, well, bizarrely, I'm Steve Playford. My one word was curious. I'm sticking with it.
Well, even more bizarrely, perhaps, my one word was hopeful, which I'm sticking with. Actually, hopeful, not. I wasn't so much thinking hopeful for this event, although of course I'm hopeful for that, or even hopeful that Neil will turn up, but hopeful really about the future. I'm sort of hopeful about the future. Why? I don't know. Anyway, it's one word, so I've already gone beyond.
Okay, so hopefulness, intrigue, curiosity, that's a good set of words to be working with. And so the way that we're going to deal with this initially is through something called BOEM Dialogue, and I'm just going to share my screen as a kind of icebreaker for us. We're going to read a series of statements from the slide that I'm going to share with you. Some of you have done this before, others not. And it really saves me the job of explaining in great detail what a BOEM dialogue is. But very simply, Bohm, it was David Bohm, who was an astrophysicist, but later on in his life, he created this particular dialogue technique. And the way that it was explained by a colleague of ours, Jessica, who runs these often, very frequently, was to imagine a group of people sitting in a circle with no table, and them putting forward into the center of the circle their thoughts and detaching themselves from that thought. The people that are in the circle hearing that thought similarly don't associate it with the person that's put it into the center. Ask themselves why they're reacting, if they are reacting in a certain way to the thought that's been put forward before responding, and then respond either to the thought or with something else that comes into your mind. So it's, for me, the power of it is, as an individual, disconnecting yourself from the thought and not feeling as though you have to defend or attack or confront or anything like that. And over time, what happens is that the group think develops in a pretty natural way in the ones that I've been to. So I'm going to share my screen so we can do what I just said. And so are you able to see the PowerPoint slide?
Yep.
Yes.
And so could I suggest, please, that we go from top left across and then down and across again from the left. And again, if it's helpful, I'll start. So we will shape our judgments and assumptions with the spirit of fellowship and trust. And Steve, could I invite you?
Is it one word?
It's the statement.
Right.
Just reading out the statement, the next statement in a dialogue.
Yeah, this
Thank
one.
you. In a dialogue, everybody wins. There shall be no attempt to gain points to make your opinion dominate.
Thanks, Steve. And then Sue?
Accept that an opinion is an assumption. It's important to see that the different opinions that you have are the result of past thought.
Thank you, Sue. Charles?
Be non-judgmental.
And Sally Ann. Oh, sorry, me, that's me, isn't it? We aim to share our opinions. Oh, no, it's not. It is Sally Ann. I was right the first time. So Sally
There you
Ann,
We aim to share our opinions without hostility.
this one is me. We shall make something in common by creating something new together. And Steve?
Can each participant try to suspend their assumptions? Do not judge them as good or bad.
And Sue?
Each person shall participate, partake of the whole meaning of the group, and take part.
Charles, you seem to be drawing all the short ones.
I know, it's good, isn't it? It's because my capacity is very limited. Be relaxed.
And Sally Ann?
There shall be no speaking at each other.
Dialogue is something creative. Steve?
Listen, listen, listen.
Sue?
Can each one of us be aware of the subtle fear and pleasure sensations that block our ability to listen freely?
And Charles, why don't you have this one?
No, I'm having be curious. I know you all are.
Sally Ann?
It isn't necessary that everybody be convinced to have the same view.
And
Okay.
we shall test the tradition of what it means to be human. So,
Alan, I'll be back.
okay,
The window cleaner's returned, I think.
yeah. So that's how a BOEM dialogue works. So what we're going to talk about is what education means to you and why it is so important. Now, just one final thing to say before we start. It's okay for there to be silence for 30 seconds or even longer at the beginning of this. Don't feel forced or pressured into having to make the first contribution. Allow it just to come when it comes naturally, okay? But if you want to say something, then feel free and let's go.
I feel education is important to me because it really shaped who I am. And I think that's the same, I guess, for everyone, including if you don't have it.
For me, I feel that it's opportunities, and also to a certain extent, this goes with opportunities, freedom, which I think, to be fair, a lot of children may disagree with at the time because maybe school doesn't feel particularly freeing, but I think education can provide you with a certain amount of freedom to do what you want to do, to go where you want to go, to have those opportunities.
Education is about relationships. I don't think I need to say more than that. It's all about the relationships.
Actually, I think that too. I think that's, to be fair, at the heart of everything we do, because without those, I don't think we as educators are going to succeed at educating those children. If we haven't got those relationships with those kids, they're not going to engage, and they're not going to want to explore, and they're not going to want to listen to us, and they're not going to trust us to go with what we want them to do.
And maybe that's why I felt hopeful about not just this event, but about the future, because one thing, as we know, the government is doing is making everyone put relationships into the curriculum for schools, as from, well, it's now as from later this year, isn't it? But
yeah,
meant to be the end of last year. Yeah.
I think it's also based on what we just read, is don't make assumptions about people.
I went for a walk just before we came on this call, and I was thinking about it. And for me, there's a real contradiction in some ways of what education has meant to me, because on the one hand, I think education works really well when there's good discipline, and somebody's mentioned that already. But on the other side of that coin, it works well only when people are inspired and there's some sense of creativity. And so that I was thinking, oh, those two don't sit easily with each other. And then the other one was the mention of relationships made me think of this, because thinking back to relationships that I had with teachers, the most effective ones, or the most positively impactful ones on me, were those who the relationships were founded on respect, but at the same time, personal connection. And once again, that's potentially a contradiction and difficult to achieve the balance. So I was thinking about how education actually is about a really masterful balance of contradictory things.
Yeah, it's about, it seems to me in the instances you give, it's education is very important in helping one understand that you need both of those things. As you say, you need a balance. You need, actually you do need discipline, you need self-discipline above all. And without that discipline, which sometimes has to be, if I say externally assisted, I mean, one has to be helped to see that self-discipline is good and works. But that discipline is actually very necessary for the process of being creative and for being inspired. You need both, really. And I think that reveals, as you say, Alan, something quite fundamental about the way the good educational process works.
I'll just welcome Neil when he connects to audio, and give him a very brief update of where we've got to, so that he can join in as quickly as possible. My screen's saying that he's connected.
About discipline is it's more to do with me with routines, in order, as Charles just said, about giving people space to be able to be creative. And in schools, or it doesn't matter whether it's in schools, but I think also the whole thing of giving people sets of rules and boundaries enables you to be able to do what you want to do within that space. So I don't see the two being sort of opposite each other, unless you are the person that's getting it wrong, in which case you might feel like that. You're smiling, Alan.
Well, I was thinking of an example where you might be encouraging the children to be creative in art, for instance, and then one of the children decides that they're going to paint the classroom walls. which is a very creative approach, but perhaps is not the one that the school would want.
I think that's a really good illustration of why Charles is mentioning self-discipline as being more important than any other kind of discipline. And if we can lead children to see the reasons why we need rules and to take ownership of those rules, then that's where the power of education is. Through the teaching about values for positive human values for living, then the children can make their own decisions, and hopefully they will be the ones that benefit everyone.
And I would agree with that as well. Sorry, I would agree with that as well, in as much as I was going to come in there and say about respect. Now, respect, I think sometimes it's too much to think, that whole "you will respect me, I demand respect" kind of thing. But it's that 100%. I mean, that is one of the values that we chose at my school when we chose our values, but because it was all about mutual respect. And I work in 2 different schools, actually. I work 3 days a week in a mainstream and 1 day a week in a alternative provider. We're not a PRU, we are an alternative provider. We have kids referred to us because they've been excluded from their mainstream. So we are working with those, but we try to turn them around and try to get them back in mainstream. Doesn't always work. And we've got a lot of them that are with us for the long haul. But again, that respect thing for them is very much, if they understand why we've got this rule, why this is, why we're trying to tell them to do this, then that, a lot of the time, and they will respect those boundaries. Not all the time, it might be tough, but again, if they feel that we are respecting them, we are here because we want them to succeed, we want them to have as good an education as they can, then actually that and those relationships that you talked about before, that is kind of what gets them back on that right track, I think. And it's that power of education, because most of them also, as they get older, start to realize, oh, okay, maybe I understand why you are doing this after all.
Yeah, so Saliana, welcome Neil. And Neil, what I'd like to do, if I could, in just a few seconds, is bring you up to speed to where we've got to. Glad you could join us. So what I've done is explained the format of the session, which is going to be this BOEM dialogue that we've started, followed by a further discussion and then personal reflection to commit to action. And the BOEM dialogue session is really about us hearing other people's thoughts and really listening carefully, understanding any reaction that we might have to what we're hearing, but considering that before we make a response, and looking to detach what we hear and what we say from us or another person, so that what we do is develop our group thinking over this dialogue, because it's a dialogue rather than a discussion. So that's where we are up to. In terms of what we've talked about so far, we've touched on quite a wide range of topics, from opportunity to discipline and creativity and the balance, to respect, and that being a very mutual respect, a relationship based on mutual respect rather than one side demanding respect of the other. And I'm sure there's lots of other things that we've touched on as well. But we would love to hear your thoughts when you're ready.
Thank you very, very much, Alan. Apologies if I'm late. I was waiting to be let in. I thought we began at 5:30 and I've been around, but obviously you started earlier, or I didn't read something carefully enough. Anyway, I'm here now. It's so good to see you and some lovely friends that I've known a long time. So it's a great privilege to talk on this incredible value, which is education. I always define a value as a principle that guides our thinking and behavior, and education has formed me over many, many years. So it guides my thinking and behavior. We're celebrating, of course, International World Values Day, which was inaugurated by the General Assembly of the United Nations. You know, it's so important. One of the things that really guides my thinking is the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And number 4 goal is education. And it's so important. I just wish more people would use those 17 goals. I've been recently using them as a part of the V20 group that's been advising the G20 Summit of World Leaders. So I'm quite familiar with those sustainable goals. But my understanding is that we cannot really achieve those goals unless we get education right. I'm a critic of education in many ways. I'm known as someone that challenges the status quo, and I will want to do that today, if I may, Alan, by just talking about how I see education at the moment, and perhaps giving a vision of what it could be in the context of schools for the future. And then you can open up the discussion in the format that you've done. Is that all right?
If it's okay with you, Neil, maybe we can touch on that at the next stage of the discussion, because we've already started to talk about what education means to people.
Yes.
And for the remaining part of this first session, perhaps we can now move on to something that you've touched on and Charles also touched on, and I mentioned in my introduction, which is all about why is education so important? And the specific that Charles mentioned that I relate to is that education can be the beginning of somebody's life, which is very different from the life it would have been had education not been there. So it would be great to hear people's views about why is education important.
I think it gives people confidence. At some point in their life, because they know that somewhere in education, and not just necessarily in schools, but in somewhere in being educated, they will know that they have done this before, or they've known they've done something about it before, and it gives them the confidence that it's there for them to be able to use.
I would agree, and I think I would say to some people, it gives them a sense of self-respect as well. I think to some people, if they feel that they've had an achievement, they've achieved something through their education, then that can contribute. And it's part of that confidence, that kind of self-respect. Now, I'm not suggesting that because somebody maybe hasn't had such good education, they haven't got self-respect, but I think it's one of those things that can, yeah, give them a sense of self-belief, maybe rather than self-respect. Self-belief, it can have that effect. And self-worth to a certain degree. One of the things my kids in my alternative provider will regularly say, when they know that I teach in a mainstream most of the time, they will say, why do you teach us then? Why do you come and teach us? And it's very much because they don't feel that they're worthy of it. You know, and I have literally, the amount of times I've said to them, do you not think you deserve to have like good teachers as well? And they are literally kind of like, oh, okay, yeah. But, you know, they don't think they are.
So education can do both, really, can't it? It can actually create obstacles, I guess, in some cases, sadly, towards the development of all these good qualities that children need to have for self-esteem, self-confidence, self-discipline, self-reliance, and so on and so on. Ideally, that's what it does. In reality, it doesn't clearly do that all the time, and maybe no education system can do that all the time. No system can be perfect, but that clearly that's what it one of the things it strives to do, because it's trying to make us I suppose, prepare us for the sort of society we want to live in. I mean, if we want to live in a society with values, as I suspect, using that as a shorthand, but with certain values, and an awareness of those values and a living of those values, then it can't start with grown-ups, it's got to start with children. And if children don't have that, then the society is going to mirror that disparity, that lack, when the children grow up, in fact, even before they grow up. So it's education produces a society that we get to live in, doesn't it? With all its failures and successes and highs and lows. It's fundamental.
I think education in its best form is the opening up of possibilities. It's opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
It's giving children a sense of experiences that perhaps they haven't had before they enter the education system.
Mm-hmm.
And to build on that, there's something about, in this country, we're talking a lot about levelling up, but education in schools plays such a critical part in that by providing an environment that perhaps some less fortunate pupils would otherwise be exposed to.
Yeah.
Education in its best form as well is community. It's community, and being a school in general, not in education in general, but a school, it is best really as a community, and really should be, and to be fair, that's why we're here now, but have those values at its centre as well, and that's important. And that should be at the centre of schools. That should be at the centre of the school's vision. It should be, and obviously we're massively biased here because we're all here because of the values, but it should be the centre of it. I want children to leave my school, and it is my school because I'm part of that community. I want them to leave. Of course, I want them to leave with the best exam results that they can get for themselves. But, I want them to have those values that we can try and instill within them as part of our community. I think that's even more important, actually. So we are, and I think COVID, the last year, has actually really impacted on the kids themselves to realise that school is so much more than exam results and curriculum and all those things. School is about community. It's about relationships. It's about community. Just before Christmas, before I got COVID myself, we were basically shipping out kids as we were having to isolate them. And they were saying, I don't want to do it. I don't want to go home. I want to stay in school. I don't want to have to isolate, because they realised that school is so much more than learning, or maybe it's a wider kind of learning.
So it's where they learn that they're part of a community, and also a community beyond school, part of a society, really, a larger.
Yes, absolutely, a wider community, or even a Venn diagram of communities.
Sally Ann, you made me think back to my kids went to a local village primary school, and the people that were in the class with them were the children of main board directors of Tesco's, as well as the children of local farmers, as well as the children of local travellers.
Yeah.
And I often look back to that time and think how lucky they were to be exposed to such a diverse community. So it just struck me what you were saying there about it being more than what we might typically regard as education, and be just as much and maybe more about life education, or the beginning of it.
I think it is, and yeah, I truly think that we want them. Maybe it's kind of almost a society in microcosm, or So yeah, I want children to come out with the best education they can, but it's kind of a different thing to different children, really.
Yeah, and if you think of education in a wider sense, away from schools, I think that's why I sort of said it gives people confidence, because as we've now said, that not everyone likes school. It doesn't fit with their the way that they learn or their development at that particular age and so on. But I do think they come back to it 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years later and think, right, okay, so I need to learn something, I need to be able to get a skill, and somewhere along the line school would have given them that model, which they may not have been successful in using at the time. I just want to sort of work on that idea of community as well, because it's interesting, isn't it, with English education at the moment, where I see, you know, as a retired head teacher, but I see a breakup of community within schools, where some schools are still local authority, some schools are very much academy based and linked to chains which are sort of spread out through the whole country. And I think we're at a point where within England, certainly, we need to sort of seriously consider actually what does community mean in terms of school. Where's that responsibility come from? And so where does the local area's values of what they want their education to be in there? Or do people just want very good schools? And they don't really worry about where it comes from. I'll just throw that out there.
I resonate so much with what you just said, Steve. As you were talking, I was looking back on my career. I was a head teacher in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. I'm one of those rarities. I was appointed as a head teacher at 26 years of age. And I've just watched schools and the journey they were on. Seismic change happened in 1988, 89 with the imposition of a national curriculum, which was all about control. And I think we have to really think what we're talking about when we use the word education. It's one of those words. If you look at the Latin root for education, it has two roots. Educare, which means all the rule-bound, forcing in, structured stuff. That I was talking to Jane before coming on air, and she went to a traditional grammar school as a child, and we often refer to her education, which she doesn't think was an education at all. She's very bright, can absorb masses of information and can regurgitate it in examinations. So she's got more qualifications than most of us, but she doesn't think she was educated. But if you look at the other meaning of the Latin word, it's educere, which is drawing out, developing, helping people to be the best people they can be. When I was working in Latvia, a professor of education there said to me, Neil, you can only tell whether an education system has been successful 30 years later. Just look at the people that are walking in the streets as adults. What sort of qualities do they have as people? And that's the judgment of an education system. Unfortunately, in this country, we've come away from education, and various people have hijacked education to have crude schooling, which is about forcing down on smaller children a complex academic curriculum, which is totally unsuitable in my view, because of what we know in brain research and neurobiology. And you know, what are we trying to do? You know, when I watch people around me breaking all the COVID rules, many of them went to good schools and they, you know, have got masses of subject knowledge in them, and they get good jobs at the top of their Tesco's or whatever they might be. But as a human being, what are they? And that's why I challenge what the whole notion of education. That's why I want a national debate about what we really mean by education for the 21st century. or are we still somewhere back in the 19th century and bolting on lots of stuff? You know, my heart goes out to both parents and teachers at the moment. Poor parents are trying to institute a curriculum which is schooly, instead of taking their children for nice walks and being curious about the countryside, being curious about the world, and really having lots of fun with their children, thinking, and that's education. So we've really come away from what education is about, and we've got this, as I say, crude schooling. That's not demeaning that lots of wonderful stuff goes on. I know that, so I'm generalizing to make a point, because I visit, one of my things I show off about, I probably have visited more schools in the world than anyone living, because of the work that I've been doing over the last 20 years. So I visited lots of schools, and they're full of wonderful people that are doing amazing things within systems that try to stop them doing the amazing things. Sue, I've talked enough. You're a head teacher not long ago. Am I saying a load of nonsense or not?
No, not at all. No, you know that I totally believe what you're saying. Yeah, it's the outstanding teaching and the schools. It's all based on their relationships and the fact that they've actually bypassed or overcome the systems that are acting against them and against what they really believe is going to help children. At heart, all good schools have those children at heart, and they want to do their best for them. They don't want to put them through exams and things. I mean, I could have cheered when those exams are stopped this year again.
Me too.
It was quite right. There was no way they should have been happening. But yeah, absolutely. And just let us focus. Let us use this time to focus on what actually matters, which is the children's well-being and their understanding and their values. It's not their academic progress. They can make up for that later. It's all about sustaining those relationships and their self-esteem and teaching them what life is about. Sorry, I got a bit carried away.
No, I agree with you totally. I mean,
going
back to what Neil was saying about the fun stuff, I am drama teacher trained. Yeah. Been teaching drama for ever since. I mean, I was inspired to be a drama teacher literally because of my drama teacher. I loved my drama teacher so much. I loved drama so much at school. I wanted to be my drama teacher when I grew up. Now I don't think I've achieved that, but I am a drama teacher. However, I now teach 70% history, which, don't get me wrong, I love. It is my second subject. I adore it, absolutely adore it. But the reason I teach history now, so much history, is because they took drama, the good stuff, out of Key Stage 3 to give more time to all the EBAC subjects, because they needed more maths lessons, or they thought they needed more maths lessons, more science lessons, more of those. So those things where those kids could explore and could learn, and, you know, not just, they're not going to be actors, most of them, of course they're not, but it's about creativity, it's about communication, it's about actually learning just to work nicely with each other. You know, all those things can't do now because no, it's not important. And even in history, all those incredibly amazing things we could do with them, half of them we can't do with them because it's not on the national curriculum, and we've got to fit this in the curriculum, get it through. You've got, you know, 3 lessons on this, you've got, you know, 2 lessons on this, because you've got to get through it. So we can't do any of the fun, the fascinating, we can't get really deep into some subject because you've got to get through it, because of that fun stuff is gone. Sorry, that was me ranting.
That's all right, Sally-Ann, but I think that this might be a really good segue, because what I'm hearing, and I don't want to put words in your mouths, but a number of you have touched on what I think is saying that we've kind of got confused between the means and the end.
Yeah.
You've started off with the end, you've developed a means to achieve that end, the end has been forgotten, and we're all focused on the means. And my daughter is a teacher, and the reason she went into teaching was because she wanted to inspire the next generation of kids. That's what she wanted to do. Then she went through a period of time where she was just really troubled because she was operating within a system that she could see was not going to be able to enable her to do that. So the way that she's rationalized that is that she also loves teaching just with the kids. And so she's now put to the back of her mind changing the system, and that stops her getting upset, and she just concentrates on doing a great job of delivery.
Yeah.
But the reason, Sally-Ann, I said this is a segue is because the next conversation for the next 15 minutes or so is really on some of the stuff that we've started to surface in a more practical way now. So in what way does education have the most positive impact, and what stops it having a more positive impact? Let's talk about those two things.
I think going back to a sense of achievement, it can have such, and going back to that kind of self-confidence, my battery's running low, I need to just plug in, and self-confidence and self-belief. When you see a kid, it could be anything. It could be they've had a moment when they've realized that they've got something, you know, that look on a kid's face when they realize they've achieved something, or, you know, that tiny, you know, even if it's just a spark, when you can see a spark, then that's just a massive thing. I think that's education at its best. Even if somebody says, I had a message yesterday, I was trying to teach on Teams and it was an absolute nightmare, and I was thinking, why this, I hate this. And then at the end, a girl just messaged, I really enjoyed that lesson, miss. And you just think, do you know, that's why we do it, isn't it? That's literally it. So maybe that's education at its best, that just firing, that lighting, that spark, maybe.
Yeah. And Sally-Ann, sorry, I don't want to go on about Lucy all session. I'll stop after this one, but she teaches in North London, not a particularly good neighbourhood, and they're doing Shakespeare. And one of the pupils said to her recently that she really enjoyed the last Shakespeare lesson, and if he had been born in a different time, he would have made a good rapper. And Lucy was just so thrilled because that is an alien world to these kids when she introduced it, and yet they've embraced it, and you know, good for her.
Yeah, absolutely. Lighting fires, lighting little sparks, you know.
There is a sense of academia, though, which is needed, isn't there? It's that curiosity as to what we're going to learn next, which is going to make me as a person feel better because I've learned something more tricky and more difficult than perhaps I thought I was possible to do.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily, all of us don't think that we should get rid of academia, because for me, to some extent, that actually is what pushes people, and for children, makes them very curious about the next lesson if it's taught well.
Yeah.
But for me, I think if we were to going back to Alan, to what you said, one of the perhaps barriers is for children who get to a certain age, and I think this has always been the case, is they don't know where they're going with the qualifications that they've got, and that's not changed at all over the years. But I think it's become very difficult now because the way in England, probably the system has been set up. Sally-Ann, you talked about arts being the demise of arts and so on at the expense of EBAC and so on. But I think that what we haven't got is the right education basis of subjects in order that students can think, right, so there's this job that I can go on to, or there's this career that I can follow. And I think it's very difficult in this country because we're going through big transition as to what we mean by work. It's completely different to what perhaps our parents, us, and the children's parents actually know as work. I mean, there's a huge sway of parents out there at the moment who have not been employed for years. And if they have, they've not been in jobs which have been consistent. And there's parents now who are in 0-hour contracts, which is very difficult for children to be able to see, all right, so if I do this, this, and this, it's going to lead to that, which probably 30, 40 years ago, it'd have been more obvious what you were heading towards. So I think for me, sometimes education is, unless people know what it is they're heading towards, it becomes very difficult to motivate them.
I would agree with that, actually. Aspirations. I mean, when I think of the kids who are predominantly boys in my AP, what aspiration? And I think, I don't know about you guys, but looking back, when I first started teaching, we had our lower ability set, but they were our college group. And a couple of days a week, they went to college, and they did, as well as doing their, their more academic subjects, they also had those college subjects. So they did mechanics or carpentry or whatever. And they knew that there was something out there that was just as valued. It was less academic, but it was just as valued. And maybe that's the way they should go, but aspirations is a massive thing. I think if you see you've got nowhere to go or nowhere that will value you, why would you bother? If there's other ways of making money. I mean, we've got a lot of our kids are in our AP are involved in crime and things because actually they don't know where they can go. They don't know what they can do career-wise. They don't have, and we try obviously to open up their aspirations, because otherwise, then what? Actually, it is easier to be out there dealing, or it is easier to be out there robbing people. And we literally do have to fight that. So I think aspiration and career planning is or can be a real issue. So I think you're right there.
I think the other battle with education, just briefly, is I think people of a younger generation, I don't know how old you are, Sally-Ann, but people of a younger generation have got a different access to media that we never experienced. We don't know, we still don't know what that is like for us. But the instant TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, you can become a superstar and get 1 million likes is a rare thing, but that's what a lot of people are aspiring to. And so it's a different way of thinking about what aspiration is for people. It used to be the old, I want to be a footballer or a pop star. Now I'm going to be a YouTube.
YouTuber, gamer. That's it.
And not everyone would be thinking like that, but that's the battle that education has to sort of to go against, I think.
And I think again, this is I think for us, in my mainstream, until we rethought relatively recently and brought much more value stuff in, I think if you aren't particularly academic, I think education is set up or some schools are set up at the moment. They think, actually, well, I know I'm not going to get A stars. I know I'm not going to be, going, or, I know I can't go on to the sixth form. So what is there for me? And you almost feel shut out. So that fear of failure makes you not want to engage, or can make you not want to engage. And in that case, it's easier to not try, because you don't feel valued and you don't feel included. It's easier to not try, and it's easier to then kind of shut down and play up, if you like, because actually to engage in education and to say, I am going to try, I am going to try and work my hardest, that's a really brave thing to do. That is a really, to stand up and to say to your peers, actually, I do want to do really well. I am going to work really hard, particularly if you're not particularly academic. That's a really brave thing to do. So a lot of the time it's just easier, to not try. And I think if kids don't feel valued for their teacher, I think if they're in and this definitely is a thing that was happening at our school, and we are trying, my mainstream, and we are trying to address, yeah, why bother? I'm not even going to engage. School only cares about the people that are going to get A stars. They don't care about me. So I think that's a major barrier to success for young people, in my experience. Which is why values are so important, because at least if a kid can feel that they're part of a community and feel that they've got something to offer, and feel that, you know, actually our core values are as important as getting an A star, then maybe they've got something to contribute after all. And that's definitely what we're trying to work on at the moment.
Neil, you mentioned a while ago about perhaps changes which came from, let's call them the government, for want of a better description. And you couldn't possibly say, but I'm going to say, without naming people, the certain Secretary of State who's Scottish and the person that went to Barnard's Castle have unpicked all those academic, vocational links courses, unpicked the Tomlinson report, which took us so far back in terms of what our aspirations for students would be. But I've not named anyone, and it's only allegedly anyway.
You've done very well. I just don't understand anymore why we have examinations at all, right? You know, the government has cheerfully sort of got rid of them for this coming year with SATs and GCSEs, but you know, they form a societal process of distribution. That's why they're there. We get distributed into various avenues in society, and it's a useful thing. But you know, most companies now, you know, besides having a quick look at qualifications, they have their own setup. One of our own daughters, she got a master's degree and she had stars coming out of her everywhere. But then she had to hit a brick wall because, you know, unless your qualification is linked to some vocational qualification, then you end up at Tesco's on shelves or something. So that's one of the myths of that the able children find, is that there's no guarantee of a job. So what the big companies that I've been working with a bit do, they have their own interview system and their own way of sifting through. And they're looking often for the people with a dynamic of personality that the qualifications doesn't show. I've got some friends who deliberately, you know, will look at someone with A stars and say, well, let's look at this person and see if they've got the character that we need in our company, because often people without that qualification have the character because they've been doing other things more interesting rather than sitting reading books, you know. So when you're looking for what does society needs, it needs a whole rounded personality, which a new form of education may deliver in the way that the current one is dead. It's dead on its feet, and we continue pretending it's adequate, but the pandemic is showing it's totally inadequate. It's criminal what's going on in so many homes. One of my daughters, she gave me a video. We went round the house seeing one daughter in one room looking at a screen. We then went into another room with a younger daughter looking at a screen. In another room was her husband trying to teach reception children on a screen. They were all on screens, two-dimensional. You talked about relationships earlier on, someone. Yeah. What relationships are there? You know, but the mythology is that, oh, we will then enable them to keep up with the curriculum. You know, why are children, for instance, learning in year 3 what I learned as a 16, 17-year-old? Why have we forced down a body of knowledge onto younger children when their brains need a different sort of diet? It's because people think that the younger you can give it to them, then they'll be better, but they can't go to university any earlier, having all this stuff that they learn. So it's based on lots of myths, which certain people, and I won't name them either, Steve, but think, is the way forward, because they perhaps have had some privileged education which is focused on the academic, and they think, oh, that's what everybody needs. But you all know this, but we do need a revolution of the heart but education systems, the one thing I've learned is you don't shift them, because everyone's been to school, everyone's got a vested interest. You try and change an education system, it's near on impossible. So what goes on is you tinker with it, you add bits to it, and then a pandemic comes along and really says, look, folk, we need to do something different. Young people I talk to, Steve, you were talking about all the things they do. They think it's a crazy system they're involved in. That's why they get bored with it, and it's not relevant. So we've got a challenge. But when you ask the question, Steve, what's positive and all that, you're wanting us to be confined by a current system. And I think we need to be far more bold now about what could replace. And there's lots in the system that I'm not wanting to throw out. I believe that all children need to learn to read, write, and do basics mathematics. That's a given. You can't be educated if you don't have that. But there's a whole raft of stuff that really needs. Children need to be excited about looking at the moon. They need to be excited when the leaf in autumn drops and ask the question, why? Children don't, because they don't learn in that way. Look at great thinkers like Sukhomlensky from the Soviet Union and others who wrote about how children best learn. Current people in education haven't got a clue about how children best learn. It was deliberate policy to turn teachers into deliverers of curriculum, not thinkers about education. So they don't have the insight, they don't have the time to think. And your daughter, Alan, is a prime example of someone that gets frustrated. Look at the numbers of teachers we lose every year because they're like your daughter, Steve, and think, why should I bother in this system? I'll stop. You can see I'm biased. Stop me.
Neil, you've made me start thinking about this comment about the impossibility of changing the system. I'm a bit like Charles in that I'm an eternal optimist and very hopeful for the future.
So am I.
And I wonder whether the pace of change now being so very much faster than it's ever been before is in somehow a way to encourage us to realize that the education system needs to change. And what I mean by that is that 50 years ago, you could learn how to be an accountant and then be an accountant for the rest of your life. Whereas now, I can't remember the stats, but it's something like in 5 years' time, 30% of the jobs haven't been invented yet. So skills and knowledge are becoming more transient and kind of obsolete in a shorter period of time. So in that way, is there a connection between the education system and that world of work, which says, guys, things need to change?
I think there is. One of the confusions in the system, and I realized this doing the G20 summit business, and that is we've got 265 million children that don't have access to school, 265 million in the world. That's a huge number, so that when most countries talk about education, they're talking about the basic need of children to be in a school setting and to learn how to read and how to write and how to do basic mathematics. So when you talk to politicians, that's what they're thinking about mainly. We, are lucky. One of the things I really regret in this country, in the United Kingdom, is that people don't value education. I've worked in countries that deeply value. They walk miles every day to go to a school, whereas our kids take it for granted. That's just the system. I'm not blaming anybody, but we have to differentiate, as I say, between what you mean by schooling and that basic entitlement to being at school and learning basic subjects. But then what do we mean when we've met that need about education and what this planet needs? You know, some of you have heard me talk about ethical intelligence. I think that's the most important intelligence to be developed in our young people if we are going to be sustainable on this planet. Everybody, you know, David Attenborough talks lovely on Sunday nights about, you know, climate change, but I still don't see people really taking him seriously, except young people I talk to. They take it seriously, but the politicians aren't. And COVID's given them a wonderful excuse not to deal with it. You know, the Prime Minister of Australia, you know, he's not having to think about why there were bushfires last year now, because he can think about COVID. It's a wonderful mask for not thinking about other things. And I'm not saying that COVID shouldn't be the most important priority at the moment, but you know, I do think that we need, as I say, to really think about what education is. So a national debate, please, Alan, anyone watching this online later, please do your best to really get people, politicians and others, and parents, I think, are the ones that will change things, especially as they've now had this experience of trying to teach at home, you know. I'll stop.
Charles, you've been listening, and I'm really intrigued to know what's going on in your head at the moment.
Well, I was thinking that, you know, we agree on so much, clearly, and it's not difficult to find many more people who would agree with what we're saying, especially throughout the teaching profession and those involved in education, which I am peripherally, but not with the sort of experience that a lot of you have. It seems to me that, going back to what I was saying again, the fundamental purpose of education should be to allow and enable and free children to explore or fulfill their potential, and to really understand who they are and what they can be, and how who they are and what they can be can relate to the society in which they live, and all that entails. So obviously it's right that the accumulation of skills and knowledge, is in part essential, but not the main point of the whole thing. So you need a certain amount of knowledge of the world. You clearly, if you're, you know, destined to be a physicist or going to be excited by it, you actually need to go through the sort of, you know, modules in education, which, you know, certainly always defeated me and probably defeat most people. But, you know, you need to have, that people are very diverse. They're so diverse, and there needs to be avenues for us. We need to open up possibilities. That's what you said, a lot of you said before. And those possibilities are endless, really. And yet so many children are clearly, you know, as you know, probably we all were at one stage, quite limited. You are when you're young. Your horizons are small. The idea of one's potential, the possibilities just aren't there. So education is all about alerting one to that, opening oneself up to that, and because we're living in a sort of fast-changing society, as you say, that's ever more necessary, isn't it? Because by the time they get out of school, the world is going to be totally different from what it was when they began. Hopefully better, but clearly, you know, there are some threats there which might make it worse. Whatever it is, they're going to have to react, and actually their reaction to it is going to depend on what they've learned at home, but very much at school as well. And so it's all to do with developing life skills, if you like, developing ways of thinking, opening their mind to possibilities, developing character so that they can respond to situations which aren't necessarily always all that good. So resilience, courage, creativity, you know, all these things. We get back to values, really, don't we? Always. I mean, the school, the education has got to encourage these important values. rather than suppress them or ignore them, or else just let them sort of flourish in little bits and pieces here and there. It's got to be based on really these important values, because they're the ones that are going to encourage the society that we want to live in to emerge based on the children that are growing up now. So I think that's really what I take from all of that. So I agree with all that you're saying, but I mean, it's awful. We come back to this one subject again, but its values are really so important to the educational system, as they are to the whole of society. But it's got to start with the kids.
Thank you, Charles. And I think this introduces us to the kind of moving towards the closing session now. So this is a time for personal reflection and just to think back on, and we've covered so much ground, so it's not an easy job to do, I guess, to be thinking about everything that we've talked about. But you've got three tasks. One is, of everything that you've heard and spoken about, what is your golden nugget or key takeaway? You know, what is the one thing that's come out of this session together that is above all for you? Secondly, what are you inspired to do in connection with World or International Education Day towards the end of the month? You know, what action, what practical, concrete action are you inspired to take as a result of what we've discussed today? Because I'm a great believer in taking action, and I know some of you on this call feel similarly. You know, what we are determined these series of sessions should not be is a talking shop where everybody just goes off the call and that's it, nothing happens. Whereas imagine if the 6 of us are able to decide on doing 6 very practical, not necessarily big things, then we will have made a change. And it might be that through that small change, other people make a change and there's a ripple. So the second one is, what is it that you're going to commit to do between now and International Education Day? And then finally, we'll have a one-word checkout. So it's not going to be very interesting for the people watching this post-event for the next few minutes, because nobody's going to say anything. Please personally reflect.
Fast forward, I advise.
Personally, yeah, that's right. Personally reflect, and those 3 tasks, please. So your key takeaway, your action, and then we'll do the one-word checkout. I can't help but be playful. This reminds me of, this has reminded me of at primary school when we used to have tests, whether it was multiplication or spelling or whatever it was. And there was a guy called Jonathan who, him and I were always top of the class. And the way to show that you'd finished your work was to get up and to go to the back of the class where there were art materials and stuff like that. And I was thinking about how do we show that we're ready to move on to the next step without making everybody else feel awkward.
Exactly. We can't even do the pens down.
Yeah,
Finish, put the pens down.
Does anybody need a bit more time?
Nah, I'm done.
No.
We're ready to go? Okay, so let's save the one-word checkout to the very final thing. So Sally Ann, would you like to share with us, one, your key takeaway, and two, your action?
I feel like my key takeaway is we all know that the education system can be rubbish, right? It can be rubbish, it doesn't work. However, I personally cannot change that system. However, I personally, it's almost like I can be a grassroots activist. I can do all those things that, you know, I can try and inspire those children. I can, you know, make that difference. I can embed those values where I am. And it's that kind of thing. If we all can do that ourselves, we can all be activists. We don't all have to be, you know, speaking at the, you know, Greta Thunberg speaking at the UN or whatever to make a difference. We can all be activists. You know, when I leave this feeling and inspired that, you know, I can do my bit to kind of share that power of education and to inspire kids and to try and make them better people for our communities, you know, the immediate community, the school community, the local community, you know, the global community. So that's kind of what I take away from this. Yes, there's so much negative, but there's so much positive that we can do as well. And that's how we're going to change things.
Okay, so, and what about your action?
My action will be to continue to, when I say push our values, that is my my action, and I'm going to go with focus on community, because I feel for us in my community and my school community, that's the most important thing right now, that kind of the importance of community and staying in touch even though we're apart. So focusing on community, things to keep us all together.
Okay, so Sally Ann, not for now, but could I invite you please to consider how you could translate what you just said into something very concrete for International Education Day that you will be able to say, I did this.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Neil, what about your key takeaway in action?
Oh, well, it was your daughter, Alan. And I say your daughter because she's the one that, despite the system, and she represents so many people, is doing a wonderful job and being inspiring to children. You know, I take my hat off to the armies of people. So that's the golden nugget for me, was that moment when you talked about your daughter. So do give her our very best wishes from us all. What am I inspired to do? Other than what I'm already doing, I suppose. In preparation, what I was doing when I was late for here was finishing a model that I was going to present to you, which is, and it's no good sort of knocking the system unless you start to put something in its place. So I've been designing a new education system in a very simple way that can be understood. And I hope to work on that with a few other people like Mick Waters and others, Professor Mick Waters, so that we can actually have something to say to the country, there is an alternative. And the great challenge is making it accessible to people. So that's one thing I'll be doing. The other thing I'm going to be doing more of is what I was doing just about an hour and a half ago, which was recording a children's story. each week for the next number of weeks, I'm recording children's stories that can be played for home learning, for school assemblies, or for teaching, at the end of the day, for a story for primary education. So I'm actually doing a lot of what I really, really enjoy, which is telling stories. So that's my actions.
Thank you very much. And Sue?
Interesting to follow on from Neil. My key nugget is basically that values at the heart of all of this, and it's so reassuring to feel this consensus amongst us all and this passion that we know what's important. So I feel inspired for the future that we have this consensus, and I know, as Charles said earlier, there are so many more of us. So many people out there.
Yeah.
So that leads into the action, which is I'm not particularly good at putting things out there on social media. As Neil knows, I can retweet, but I can't actually create a tweet. But I'm going to do that, and I'm going to get out there some of these things that we've been talking about. I'm determined I will learn to do it, and Neil will keep an eye on me, make sure I do it. I know, but I'm also involved in what Neil was talking about, the story, and I've been working today. The reason my day has been hopeful is that I've been working with another of our colleagues at VBE, Nigel Cohen, preparing what we're going to call a gift to teachers and families in schools at this really difficult time, which includes the link to Neil's story. So that's our gift of hope for this week, and it will go out tomorrow, but we're going to continue doing those for the next probably 9-10 weeks. So yeah, that's our bit.
Okay, thank you, Sue. And Charles?
I guess my takeaway is really that yet again we're sort of it's brought home to us that the system is really failing in lots of ways. Maybe it always has been, I don't know, but it's certainly not doing what we think it should be doing. And I guess my follow on from that is that how do we change it? We probably can't change it individually. We certainly can't change it individually. We can put up, but what we can do is put forward ideas, which clearly Neil is doing. Maybe one day everyone will sort of say, well, Neil, we need to do this, and we'll have a system that looks like the system we want, which I'm sure Neil's system does. But in the meantime, all we can do really is to try and do our best to do what we can in our respective roles, and I guess model the sort of system that we want to see, model the sort of people that we want, because we are all role models in different ways, some much more than others. Depending on where you are, what your profile is. Sally Ann's there in the thick of it, being a role model all the time, and a fantastic one. And that's what we can do. We can put our values into action and really try and change or increase the awareness of the importance of those values in schools, among teachers, and the whole system, among hopefully even as rising up to change the values of the people that run the system as well and take the decisions, and all the educators that opine and produce papers. Let's have more about character, values, and all the other important things, the heart things, as Neil said, that are so crucial. So we can change the climate bit by bit, slowly and slowly, but by our own actions, and that's what I take away. So my action based on that, I guess, is to try and do that. But specific actions, I think all I can do really, because I don't have the power to influence anyone in the education system at all, is to get on Twitter or wherever it is, talk to people in and around the Education Day, and really try and hammer that message home. Hammering home isn't the right metaphor really, because no one responds to have anything hammered at them, but to try and reinforce that message in a way that's persuasive and makes people.
Charles, hammer it home in a velvet sock.
In a velvet sock, yeah, one of your velvet socks, which I'll borrow.
And Steve.
Yeah, I just want to ask Charles: is hammering a value or a virtue?
Well, I think hammering in the right situation. It depends what sort of nail you've got. So yeah, but usually not either. Of course, it's neutral. It's the spirit in which we do it, isn't it, Steve?
So mine are, the learning is from what I've just been listening to, people are inspired to learn to raise their self-esteem. And we need a new dynamic system to be able to ensure that broad breadth of education that we've all been talking about is out there. And interestingly, I'm very interested to talk to you about your model. I go back to I think it was 2007, someone produced on a postcard the big picture, which was basically the whole of education. And that's quite a good thing to look back on. And my action is I'm doing a webinar tomorrow for Manchester voluntary sector, which is to do with how we use routines and agility and skills to be able to overcome uncertainty. And in that, I will talk about education and values. And I've also got some coming up with ASCOR, which is to do with resilience and sustaining leadership and so on. But actually, to be able to use that to influence ASCOR to talk about values and within education, which is something they do anyway. But it'd be good to have that conversation. I know they're very keen to get onto that. That's my practical.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. For me, I've experienced a real shift this evening, for which I thank you, because a number of us talked about us being passionate about values and their importance. And up until this evening, my position had been that values were really important in education. But actually now I believe that they are more important than that. They are central. They should be central.
Yeah.
And the knowledge bit is secondary. And I hadn't really thought like that before. So that's my key takeaway. My action, I'm going to approach my partner's daughter's school and offer them a session on values, and tell them that idea has come out of this session and because we've got International Education Day coming up. So that's my practical action that I'm going to undertake this month. So that's it. Thank you very much. We're 1 minute over time, which is pretty good. And that means that we've got enough time for our checkout word. And then I'll just close before we sign off. So Sally Ann, what's your one word to say goodbye? How do you feel?
Oh, inspired.
Thank you, Sally Ann. Neil.
Hope.
Charles.
Hope.
And Sue.
Still hopeful, even more so.
Steve.
Collaborative.
Okay. And mine is futures, because that's the importance of what we're talking about. I've always thought of education as being important, but that's what we're talking about. Future lives here. Okay, so thank you all so much, especially because this is the first of the Deep Dive Values series. It's been a fantastic start, and it's going to be a tough one to follow up on. The next one is going to be on the topic of kindness on Tuesday, the 9th of February. And that's in association with Random Acts of Kindness Day, which is later on in the month. You're mostly education focused, but if you're interested in kindness, it would be great if you're interested to join.
We're not interested in kindness, don't suppose any of us are.
It would be very kind of you to join.
I am, because it's one of our core values that we chose as a school, kindness.
There we are.
There you are, one of us.
We have a wonderful organisation called Be the Ripple, who are spreading the word of kindness that we're partnering with for that event. And so looking forward to seeing what comes out of that. Thank you very much again for your time, and have a good evening.
Alan, before we sorry to interrupt, before we wrap up, people were mentioning about Twitter. Well, obviously that's where we found this. Is there, are people on it already? Can we share Twitter handles, if that's called, or is there a way of us doing that?
Yes, you can. So so if you do use hashtag values deep dive, that would be great. There's also World Values Day to hashtag, because we're any money that we're raising from this, we're wanting to share with World Values Day, and also the word or hashtag values. That's the other one that we use.
Right, fab. And we'll be able to find each other's kind of names if we don't already have each other on, follow each other on Twitter via that hashtag, will we?
Not necessarily, but if everybody's happy to, then I can just send an email to all of us so that we're all connected personally, if you'd like to do that.
Okay, Neil's just put his up on the bottom of the screen, has he?
Fine, okay.
I can't do that, that's very technical.
Yeah, so to save everybody doing that, Sally, or Sally Ann, or for you, if you've not done that before, I can just circulate.
Yeah, that'd be fab, thank you. You've got mine, obviously.
Okay, thank you very much, and goodbye.
Oh, thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, bye.
Lots of love. Bye-bye.